Hi, my name is Laura Thomson. I work for the Mozilla Corporation. I speak very fast and I have a funny accent. So if you have any trouble understanding me, please put your hand up and ask a question. Yes, Nate?
A little louder.
Louder? Okay, I'll be louder. It's hard for me to be as loud as, some other people, but I'll try. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about building the addons.mozilla.org API, which is all built in Cake, and I have some pretty pictures and graphs and architecture diagrams, and then I'll actually talk about the API as well. So, before I get started, I probably should tell you a little bit about my background. I'm kind of infamous for having said that all frameworks suck, if you've read that. You may have heard that around the place, which was kind of an oversimplification of what I said, actually, I think. But quotes and things like that tend to have a life of their own. People, it's much easier to say all frameworks suck than, well, lots of people misuse them and I wish there weren't so many of them, and why does everybody feel like they need to write their own framework and 99% of them suck? Okay, so just to kind of give you a little bit of context, I had this fear, and I know that people from work were saying, are they going to throw rotten tomatoes at you when you go down there to talk to those cake people? And I was like, no, they're lovely people. They wouldn't do that. Suck. Okay, so I'll start by talking about AMO. AMO is what we internally call addons.mozilla.org for short, because saying addons.mozilla.org takes quite a long time and programmers are lazy. Probably everybody here has been to the AMO website. I hope. Is there anyone that hasn't been to this website? Cool. Use Firefox? Okay. But you've never been to AMO? Sorry?
Die-hard Firefox.
But you've never been to AMO? Huh. Oh, wow. Okay. So I guess I better tell you what an add-on is then. Everybody else probably knows. So add-ons are things that you can add to your Firefox to add features or add tweaks or whatever. We had a publicity campaign for a while which was called Pimp Your Firefox, which I think gives the idea pretty well. Like, you can add stuff. I'll give you an example, actually, if it won't be too much departure. Yes, the browser I'm using today is actually not Firefox, it's Minefield, which is what we call the internal nightly builds of Firefox 3, because it tends to explode when you step in the wrong place. Maybe I don't have network. Oh, I guess I don't have network. Doesn't matter anyway. So if you look under tools, you'll see that I have all this kind of stuff added on. So you're a web developer and you've never used Firebug.
I just learned about Firebug.
Okay, well, Firebug is a Mozilla add-on, and I have it disabled because I'm running Minefield and it doesn't work with Minefield. Anyway, it's kind of irrelevant. But there are plenty of add-ons that you can add. The ones that are probably most popular, or at least sort of most widely known, are like the Google toolbar, Firebug, which I talked about, JavaScript debugger, web developer toolbar, and people usually use one of either like Tamper data or live HTTP headers, which are things that let you actually see the requests and responses that go out in their raw form, which is really useful for debugging lots of things. So they're the kind of ones that web devs use. Ones that I think the most popular one of all is AdBlock, which blocks pop-ups and blocks banner ads and all kinds of stuff like that. So if you haven't tried any of those, I thoroughly recommend them to you. Okay, so just to give you a bit of background, addons.mozilla.org was completely overhauled at the start of 2007. It was rewritten from scratch because the code that was there was kind of crappy. There was a code name for this project which was codenamed Remora. If you don't know what a Remora is, it's like a big carnivorous fish. And it survives actually by suckering onto bigger fish and letting them swim it around. So it's like an add-on, right? Onto this really cool, really big fish, you have this like little thing that kind of parasites onto it. So this was kind of a metaphor for add-ons. And this is the logo for the Cake implementation. And I'm told that this represents like the Remora fish birthing all of these add-ons, which was not my initial reaction to the picture, but I thought I would share that with you anyway. Okay, so the reasons, and this was before I started, just kind of a bit of clarity. Remora was done in the start of 2007. I joined Mozilla in September 2007, so this was kind of before my time. But I have been working with the code, obviously, on a day-to-day basis. So there were several reasons. One was the licensing issue. and this is why I use Cake over other frameworks, because Cake has a nice friendly MIT license. Mozilla's code is all tri-licensed, so it's available, so the code for AMO is all available under an MPL, which is the Mozilla public license, the GPL or the LGPL, whichever one you would like to use, which is kind of confusing. It's not always compatible very easily with other licensing schemes. At the time it was selected, and I think Nate made reference to this in his keynote today, which was, at the time it was like much, much further along the track than any of the other frameworks. And I know a lot of the other frameworks have had kind of a bit of a code sprint this year, but you guys have been quite solid for a long time, which is obviously appealing. There's kind of an aversion to using things that are in alpha and beta. So things that are kind of sitting at their 0.9 release are not going to get used at Mozilla. Okay, and it's PHP based. Everybody that works there has a pretty good background in PHP. And actually the thought at the time was it'll be easy to get contributions from the community because there's so many PHP users in the community. If people want to contribute to the website, then they can, and there'll be millions of programmers out there dying to contribute to addons.mozilla.org. Interestingly enough, that actually kind of backfired, because I think that a lot of people know PHP, but out of sort of the vast pool of PHP programmers, not that many of them are familiar with Cake still. And it just means that the barrier to entry is slightly higher. People think, oh, I just want to fix this one little thing that annoys me, and then they kind of look at the code and think, well, I've never seen Cake before and I have no idea what any of this stuff does. It takes them a lot longer to get up to speed than they think that it will. Okay, so those are the numbers for addons.mozilla.org. We do 72 million hits per day. A lot of those are not dynamic. A lot of those are images and JavaScript and CSS and stuff. 4 million page views. That's actually pages coming out of Cake. And 1 million user sessions. So a user visits 4 pages on average. Those are relatively big numbers. They're not the biggest numbers I've ever seen, but they're pretty big numbers. We think from my rough discussions with Larry and Nate that might be the biggest Cake install, but I'm not 100% sure. You think it's the biggest one?
It's the biggest one that I know of.
Yeah, that's cool. That's the biggest one that I know of too.
What's the time period on 4 million page views?
Sorry, per day. That's all on a per day basis. Yep. Number of connections at any given time. These are out of CakePHP, which is our monitoring software. So you can see the number of concurrent connections can be anywhere between 50 and 100,000 at a time. The traffic is biggish as well. You can see the number of requests. There's a spike there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I have no idea what that is. I guess it's everybody starting up their browser and downloading their Firefox updates. But yeah, so we think it's a really, really big install of Cake. It's supposed to be the biggest wedding cake in the world. How we make that run. I thought I would talk about the infrastructure a little bit, because people are kind of curious, if I'm going to run Cake does it scale? If it scales, what kind of hardware do I need to run to scale it? So I'll talk a little bit about this. We have 4 NetScalers. 2 are in San Jose and 2 are in Amsterdam. The pair in San Jose are run as a high availability pair with failover. Each of them has 2 SSL acceleration cards. The ones in Amsterdam are not run as an HA pair, they just run independently. And they each have 1 SSL accelerator. One of the things that we do that allows us to scale is to not do SSL beyond the NetScaler. So NetScaler handles the SSL, and everything behind from peer to peer is just pure HTTP. If Apache had to do all those SSL connections, we wouldn't be able to do as much traffic as we do. It's the hardware acceleration of the SSL that helps. All the connections to AMO are through SSL. And the reason for that is that people are downloading software and installing stuff to their browser, so we think it's kind of important. That's the reason for that. In the middle we have a cluster of Apache nodes. There are at the moment 12 of those. It has varied between 3 and 12 over the last kind of 12 months, depending on machines coming in and out of service. If we're doing a launch, I don't know if you've noticed, but when you get a new version of Firefox, it says, you have updated to Firefox X. Now it's time to go and download some add-ons. So people tend to click through. Those tend to be our heaviest traffic days. The downside is at the moment we don't have any spare nodes. We don't have more that we can put in the pool on a launch day. So it's 12, and on a launch day it's 12, and we hope the cluster doesn't crash. And sometimes it does. Behind that, we have more levels of caching. we have 2 dedicated servers that just run memcache. They're kind of like exist purely to take the load off our database, which is MySQL. MySQL database, we have 1 master and 2 slaves. Nothing terribly exciting there. People, I think, often find it weird that we have dedicated memcache servers. It's not really that weird, it's just a way to decouple it, if that makes sense. Okay. Just to tell you what those machines are, if anybody's interested, if I'm boring you to death, I will hurry up, but people kind of tend to be interested in the hardware for some reason that I don't understand. Are there any sysadmins in the room, or is everybody a developer? Yeah. Are there any sysadmins in the room, or everybody just programmers?
I did sysad.
That's all right. Okay, I wasn't sure if you were. Yeah, I'm not a sysadmin either, but I have worked pretty closely with the ops teams. Okay. So the Apache machines are dual Xeons and dual core Xeons, a mix. It would be nicer if they were all dual Xeons, but you know, we live with what we have. And you'll notice that some of them run SCSI and the crappy ones run SATA. They all run PHP 2. Apache 2, PHP 4.3.9, and Cake 1.1.12.4205, which I realise is quite an old version. We know that. Because we have a bunch of customisations, upgrading is relatively hard, so we try not to do it. We'll upgrade to 1.2. That's kind of scheduled after we do our PHP 5 migration, which we had actually started on before Christmas. So all the Mozilla websites were on PHP 4. We've been gradually migrating them over to PHP 5 because PHP 4 is going to end its life. There's a great deal of clarity. Actually, one of the first things I did when I arrived at Mozilla was I said, what version of PHP are you running? And they said 4, and I was like, let's fix this. So we just have to make sure all the tests pass and stuff. So it shouldn't be a big deal, and it shouldn't take that long. And we really want to do it because with PHP 5 you have access to a lot of better measurement tools for things like performance tuning. Excuse me. And once we've done that, then we need to upgrade our MySQL, which I haven't listed there. It's on the next slide. It's MySQL 4.1. And it's probably about time to go to 5, and then we'll do Cake. So that's kind of the order of upgrade. There's a little bit of fear of upgrade, just to be aware of that. And I think a lot of organisations have that. Infrastructure teams tend to get anxious about us saying, let's just whack on this like super alpha version because it's really cool. It's like, no, get down. I don't care if you're using it like a 5-year-old version of PHP, just suck it up. But we are. Databases. We only just added the second slave. We had 1 master, 1 slave for a really long time. You can see, by the way, the fact that we have had for a really long time 1 master, 1 slave, that we do make really extensive use of caching, because we wouldn't be able to survive with effectively like 1 read box unless we were doing a lot of caching. The second slave is not as good a machine. The first one is a dual core Xeon, the second one is a DL 140, which is a bit slower, but we needed one, and that was a box that we happened to have. We put that on for the Firefox 3 betas because that's when it started to cause problems. For the first Firefox 3 beta, there was the launch screen that you got said, search addons.mozilla.org. So it took you straight to search, which is the slowest, most performance problematic part of the entire website. That was when we had the second slave, after the first day when it crashed. Okay. Excuse me, the memcache boxes are the same config as the Apache servers, the G4 ones. Okay, so it's not a vanilla cake. If it's a chocolate cake or kind of a cake that's a little bit soggy in the middle, or a cake with chocolate chips or something. We have a couple of special needs. One of them is the volume, and the other one is localization. One of the kind of missions of Mozilla is to be available to as many character sets and languages as possible. And that applies to the add-ons as well. I was talking to Larry before, and we were looking at some particular add-on in the API, and it's a Latvian plugin of some kind. Oh, excuse me. And dealing with UTF-8 stuff is not straightforward. I think it'll be a lot easier as we get into PHP 6. At the moment, it's really not straightforward at all. Things like, so the sanitize that comes with 1.1 isn't UTF-8 safe. which is a little bit of a nightmare. We rewrote our own sanitized code for that purpose, and I realised, of course, it's going to be replaced in 1.2. The API that I'm going to talk about actually uses a different sanitize again, because sanitizing output for XML is different from sanitizing output for HTML, as I'm sure you know. Excuse me. Sorry about the coughing, it's just allergies. Okay, so about the API. This has been my project, the first project that I worked on when I started. I'm still working on it now, alongside other things. The AMO API exists for two reasons, and one is that they wanted to have better integration of addons.mozilla.org into Firefox 3. There are things called the addons manager, and in Firefox 2 all you can really do with it is enable addons, disable addons, and go and manage the preferences for each one of your add-ons. So, you know, if you're using a pop-up blocker, go and manage how aggressively it blocks things and what kinds of things it blocks and what sites it allows to pop up and things like that. In version 3, it allows you to search for an add-on, to look at recommended add-ons, that are compatible with your browser and things like that. The second purpose of the API, I have one, thank you, is to be available for community use. So, first of all, we'll get Firefox 3 out the door, then we'll start. There is some documentation that's publicly available, but we haven't really plugging it yet. We'd like to get most of kind of the wrinkles out before we say to people, go forth and use it wildly. Some people are already, I know, the people that are sort of in the developer community have started playing with it already and coming back with lots of bugs, which is both good and bad, of course. So, if you're not running Firefox 3 beta, this is what the new add-ons manager looks like. When you come into it, as well as managing the add-ons that you have, you can get more add-ons. It'll give you a list of what's recommended to add to your browser. Obviously, you can see I took a screenshot with the beta, add to mine field. It also lets you search for add-ons without having to go to the addons.mozilla.org websites. This is actually part of the desktop application. And each one of these is using data that's returned from the API. There are some advantages to that, at least in part because it means that rather than sort of you having to go to the website and, you know, wait for a whole web page to download with all the images and so on, you can just get the XML, which is more terse. Okay. The API calls that are implemented are as follows. You can get the details of a particular add-on, and you have to use the add-on ID. Each add-on in the add-ons ecosystem has two IDs associated with it. One of which is the ID associated with addons.mozilla.org. The other one is what's called its GUID, which is actually its globally unique identifier. GUIDs have kind of a funny format. They look like curly brace, great big hex string, close curly brace. And at the moment, that call works with your addons.mozilla.org ID, but it doesn't work for GUIDs. I've had some problems getting Cake to cope with all the funny characters that are in GUIDs. It tends to go, not good data. You don't want that. Somebody's trying to hack you. And it's like, no, I really want it, but I haven't quite worked that out yet. I will, and maybe someone will even help me while I'm here. There's search, so /API/search, and the search term. There's a couple of versions of sort of listing add-ons. So if I do API list new, it will tell me what the newest add-ons are in a particular category, if I specify it, which is optional, and the maximum number. So I can say new extensions 5, and that'll give me the 5 newest extensions. Or I can say new themes, and it'll give me the newest themes and so on. The different types that are available are extensions, which are like Google Toolbar, themes, which retheme your browser, obviously, dictionaries, which are probably not useful unless you're actually using it. Actually, there's some Europeans here, I think, so it probably is useful to talk about, you know, you can install your German dictionary or whatever. Plugins, which are usually not installed via add-ons because they're transparent. That's when you go to open a PDF and Firefox says, hey, you don't have Acrobat. This is where you can get it from. And the last one is search engines. And people often don't realise that Firefox has pluggable search engines. You know that you have like that little thing on the side where you can choose, in the search box you can choose Google or you can choose Wikipedia or whatever. You can actually install one of those. And writing one of those is about 3 lines of code. So if you have a site that you particularly like to have a search interface to in your browser, I recommend that's a really good starting point for building an add-on because it's really, really straightforward. Okay. recommended lists, there are editors for the addons.mozilla.org website, and they go through add-ons and say which ones they think are really good or cool, and you get the latest recommended ones, and that's also embedded in Firefox there. Okay, there's also a couple that are of API calls that are aimed at extension and add-on developers. The first one of those is cumulative downloads, and that tells you how many people have downloaded your particular add-on. At the moment, people have a graphical user interface for seeing that, but being able to pull it out through an API means they can generate their own graphs and do funky stuff with it. The graphical interface will probably be changed to use the API, but it doesn't yet because they were developed at the same time. It's one of those things. The update pings is also something that you can use. The difference between a download and update ping. You're probably familiar with the fact that when you're using Firefox, it'll come up and say, there's an update to your Firefox, click here to restart, whatever. Your add-ons also do that, and those are called automated updates. The Firefox ones go through a thing called the automated update service. And what that means is every day Firefox calls home, sometime while you're using it. It's at a random, some sort of statistically distributed curve to go into the lowest traffic times. It will ping the automated update service and say, hey, do you have any updates for me? And they'll come back. You'll also get any updates for any add-ons that you have. So that's part of the automated update service as well. The thing that's kind of cool about that as well is obviously there are, speaking of like traffic that we manage with our other systems, there's more than 100 million daily users of Firefox. So that means we have more than 100 million hits per day on the automated update service. So that actually has significantly more traffic than add-ons. Okay, so the reason that you as an add-on developer might want to look at update pings is that it gives you a realistic idea of how many people are actually using your add-on on a day-to-day basis. So if you have something installed and you're using it, then it'll ping home looking for updates. So on a day-to-day basis, you get an idea of exactly how many people use your stuff, which is, of course, the number that people want, you know, like, I built add-on foo and it's used by 60 million people worldwide, or whatever. None of them are that popular, but you get the idea. Okay. At the moment, you'll notice that all of those API calls are read-only, like they're all GET. There are no posts. It's RESTian, which I think I didn't say, but I just kind of assumed that everybody would have thought that. And I don't really know why I assumed that. It's been kind of an assumption of mine for so long that I didn't think to talk about SOAP or anything like that at all. The things that we're going to add are rating. So at the moment, if you go to addons.mozilla.org, if you have an account and are logged in, you can rate add-ons that you have. Okay, so you might go to you can write reviews of them as well. Might go to the web page for the Google toolbar and say, Google toolbar is great, or it's terrible spyware, and give it how many stars you think it deserves. So we started work on this, and it was interesting. We kind of have deferred it for now because we had a debate about authentication. If you allow people to rate things without requiring them to authenticate first, then obviously you get a lot of spam. You know, I've written an add-on and I think it's great, so I'm going to write a script that sends lots of requests rating my add-on as having 5 stars, right? And there's very little way to protect against that. We wanted to add authentication, but that adds a kind of a whole layer of complexity to the API, which it doesn't have at the moment. There is no developer ID. You know, there is no authentication required. This is going to be deferred until after. We have a project coming up this year, which is called Mozilla ID, which is single sign-on across all the Mozilla websites. It's likely to be tied into OpenID. And what we're going to do is change that, or reintroduce that API call at that stage, and allow you to rate add-ons with your Mozilla ID. Excuse me. There are more things we want to do, one of which is upload. So if you have created an add-on and you want to now upload it to your account on addons.mozilla.org, we'll have a call for that. And whatever else the community wants. I think once the developers community starts playing with this, then they'll get some more idea of about what they require, and then we can build it. If anyone has any ideas or things that they'd like to see, feel free to talk to me this afternoon and get your stuff on the agenda. Okay, that's kind of all the fluffy stuff, implementation-wise. So when I came to this project, I had never used Cake. It was completely uninitiated in September. I had, however, used Ruby on Rails. Been using PHP for about 10 years. I use Zen Framework. I've been programming MVC paradigms since like 1994, I think. The first introduction I had to that was programming for X in motif. And if you've never done that, then thank your lucky stars and hope that you never do have to do that, because it's extraordinarily painful. So one of the reasons that I talk about this is that, you know, having worked with a bunch of different MVC frameworks, coming to a new one, you think, oh, well, it's just another MVC framework, it'll be easy. And what I kind of wanted to talk about were the things that I thought were hard or different coming to Cake from a different background. And I'm also well known for saying I hate frameworks suck, blah, blah, blah. So it seemed like I should actually justify that at this point and talk about that a little bit so that people don't actually throw rotten tomatoes at me. There's kind of a few reasons for that. And the funny thing is, having said that, for the last 6 months, frameworks have completely absorbed my life. I blogged about this yesterday, which was that I've been working on this API stuff and on add-ons in general. I tech reviewed a Rails for PHP programmers book from Mike Naberezny, and I wrote the foreword for Cal Evans' Zen framework book. So maybe if I'm going to like enjoy frameworks, I should have like spread my loving around or something. But the funny thing about it is I should really explain sort of what it is that I don't like. What I don't like is that a lot of my interest in code is in scalability and performance. And a lot of framework code that you see is really, really bloated and slow. Right, everybody's familiar with that problem. If you've had a look at Paul M. Jones's framework benchmarks, you'll see exactly what I mean. And if you haven't, you should read those because they're really, really good reading. And Paul's a smart guy, and yes, he works on Solo, which is a competing framework, but, you know, that's what benchmarks are like. And if you... benchmarks are traditionally done by vendors, right? So they always make whoever's product it is that is doing the benchmarks look good. So you guys should do some competing benchmarks and talk about them, I think. It's always good to get multiple points of view. So that's one reason that I hate it. The other thing that I really dislike about frameworks is that everybody writes one of their own. My husband is fond of saying there are 1.2 frameworks per PHP programmer, which I actually think is probably kind of low. I'm on the OSCON program committee this year, and like a number of people submitted talks saying, I will talk about my new PHP framework. There's like 19 talks. And you've never heard of any of them. And they're actually, like, the only cake related talk is ours, by the way. So I don't know where you people were at the conference having fun. I know, drinking too much beer. Yeah, they proliferate. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that obviously MVC is a design pattern. And the, you know, defining feature of a design pattern is that no two implementations are the same. Okay. You're going to take a sort of basic idea and everybody's going to implement it slightly differently. And some of those are philosophical differences. Like I had some talk today saying, you know, well, we have kind of a philosophical difference from the Zen framework. We have like Cake is pretty opinionated software from what I can see. There's like what we think is the right way to do it, and everything is consistent, which is actually one of its real strengths. It's very internally consistent. But what was it? A lot of people don't have that kind of desire for internal consistency. A lot of MVC frameworks are built by people who have come straight out of college knowing nothing but Java and just really don't get it. So a lot of the code out there is particularly poor. It's not something I think Cake suffers from, so feel free from that. That's about it in terms of my criticism. Oh, and the other sort of general sort of thing that I tend to bitch about with regards to frameworks is that the value in them, or at least one of the values in them, is that if you go into a new application and you're going to write maintenance code on it and you don't know how it's architected, it's always really hard to get up to speed. And if something's architected with an MVC framework, then theoretically you know how the code is going to be laid out, you know where to look for stuff and how it ought to work, and you can get to the part that you need to work on faster, right, and get it solved faster. That's supposed to be one of the main strengths. The difficulty is because there are 72,546.8 PHP frameworks, every time you sit down, you don't really get much of a speed up. So I think it would be nice when things settle down to being like 4 or 5 really good competing frameworks at least. At the moment there's a lot and most of them aren't that good. It's actually one of the strengths of like Ruby on Rails is that it's the one true framework, and there are all those one true believers drinking an awful lot of Kool-Aid, but they all think the same way. So it's kind of, the advantage of that is they do go into a new project and it is structured the way that they expect. Anyway, that was the framework bitching part. My first few days in the project, I was like, oh yeah, I understand how this is laid out. And there's always the things that, you know, whoever wrote it thinks are really, really intuitive and aren't. And one of the things for me with Cake was a learn the naming conventions. It's just kind of like a personal anecdote. So what's the singular of API, and how do I convince Cake that it isn't a pus? It really wanted me to make a model called a pus. So I guess that comes after a lot of thought. I couldn't understand why this was, and sort of after swearing a great deal, I realised that it's because an octopus, the plural of that is octopi. And then it made sense. But before that didn't make any sense at all. Anyway, I solved that problem pretty quickly, but it was just like my first WTF moment. I hope you guys have all seen that. There's a cartoon that was being passed around earlier in the week, the code review cartoon. Has everybody seen that? No? It's the difference between good code and bad code. And there's two closed doors, and there's a sign on the door that says code review. And on the good code, you can see like two little thought bubbles coming out saying, WTF? WTF? But on the bad code one, it's like, dude, WTF? WTF is this crap? And just like, you just so the measurement of good code versus bad code is WTFs per minute. WTFM. So if it has like a high WTFM, then you're not doing too well. So, anyway, I don't think Cake had a particularly high WTFM, was what I was getting around to saying through that very long anecdote. Okay, so newbie things that were hard. Getting something working at all in the first place. And that sounds kind of silly, and yes, I know there's a really good tutorial. Tutorial is really good, and I often find this for greenfield stuff, like if you're sitting down to write an app and you have no code to understand. If you're sitting down to work on somebody else's relatively sophisticated Cake code and you've never used Cake, you look at stuff in the manual and then you look at stuff in the code, and you kind of go, well, this stuff's a lot more complicated than that. I don't understand how these models work, because the models in add-ons are actually insanely complicated. So any kind of like hints or tips for newbies on how to get your head around that, and I'm not really sure that I don't if I get my head around it, then maybe I'll run out of or something. It took me like a whole day to discover debug mode, which makes it really hard to debug without that. I think the hardest thing, and I've coded a lot of frameworks, is always the thing that seems to be the most different between different frameworks is the way that they do models and the way that you actually get your data. And that's actually really frustrating, especially when you're an experienced programmer. You say, well, if I wasn't using these models, then I could get this data in like 10 seconds. But because I don't understand how these models really work and how it's all hung together, and oh my god, get text is in there as well, and I don't get how that works at all at this stage. If I could teach you like an entire day to write something that should take you 10 seconds, I think it puts a lot of people off. And I don't know what the solution is to that, but if people's first experience is, it will take me 10 seconds to write it without the framework. The framework takes me a day, and maybe it'll get better, but how much better can it get? Then I think that we need to find a way to ease that transition, make it easy for people to make the jump. I don't know what the solution is to that yet either, because it's a good jump to make, but how do you make it easy?
Making the council. Teach people the council, teaching people big stuff, models. Then they can get started and stuff. But people don't understand the council right away, and they're trying to write it by hand.
Yeah.
So if you could point them somehow to the council, I think that would be a really good solution right off the bat.
But then people are just as scared of the command line as they are of trying to get data back. I think more simple examples is probably the best place to start. Just stepping through and saying these are all the different things that you can possibly do, and just having a really wide list that somebody can work from.
I would really like to see a tutorial for understanding somebody else's Cake code. I think that would be a really useful thing. Especially, as I said, when you're writing like a simple example, it's fine, and then making that jump is really challenging. So that would be a good area to kind of round out the documentation.
That's where Solar's Mind Read class comes in.
You serious? I've used Solar. I wouldn't, knowing Paul, I wouldn't be surprised what to come up with. That dude has some black magic.
Yeah, he also came up with Solar Mind Write.
That's handy. So I can automate all my work. Okay. I think one of the hardest things being a performance person was coming in and sort of doing something in a fairly naive fashion with models, and then going, oh my god, I wrote this fairly naive piece of code and it runs 200 queries. How do I get to a point where that doesn't happen? That's another thing that, again, would be really useful to see more, just from like a relative newbie point of view. And I'm starting to work it out, but it's just feedback. One of those just like personally frustrating things is a lot of stuff that we did for 1.1, like the Memcache stuff and the work that stuff, which is very specific to Mozilla and not as generic and stuff as only 1.2. So we have this fear of like backwards compatibility and how all will go when we do upgrade, how much we can actually rewrite. That remains to be seen. That's just a general software frustration in general. Okay, so the architecture of the actual API has its own controller. It has a RESTian layer which just says this is XML, and it has a bunch of views. There are, in the end, we started off with our own model and ended up getting rid of it. It really only reuses the existing models. And one thing that I found doing this was kind of interesting because coming in at the data from a different angle, coming in from the API as opposed to the front end, was I started to see places where things were done in controllers that really needed to be in models. So there's only one place in the code that actually accesses that data, and people can be sloppy about like putting the queries in the controller rather than like pushing them down into the model. So that's something that will go as part of that process of retuning and retweaking and trying not to break too much stuff as I go. One of the difficulties I had, and one of the reasons this was more challenging than it probably needed to be, was that what was required for the API called the return data was different from what the website uses. So an example is the API calls have to return all the reviews for a particular add-on. And the website doesn't. It has that as like two completely separate pages, right? They're done by two different actions. And there's stuff that needs to be down there in the model that isn't. It's like separated into two different actions in two different controllers. So it's interesting too, because when you're like, is that bad? Like, can I just start hacking out all this code that I think other people have written, sort of not, thinking ahead? And the thing to remember too is that everybody that worked on the code that we have was new to Cake. So it has flaws like that that, improve over time. The difficulty is, of course, the usual thing about finding time to go back and read back to what you did and make it less ugly, which is always hard, no matter what you work on. Okay, so the performance tweaks that we have, that would be kind of things that I have learned, and probably everybody here knows these things, so if you don't know these things, it might be interesting. Caching is your friend. That's true of like any web app. But I think because a lot of the pages we have are relatively database intensive. I don't think we need a public page for 200 queries, but you get the idea. There are some that are quite database intensive. But they're also relatively static. They don't change very often, so we generate them once, which is slow, and store them on a NetScaler. I'll give you an example. So in Amsterdam, we have NetScalers, we don't have any web services. Anything that doesn't have a cache hit has to be served by San Jose, which is quite a long way for traffic to go. It's interesting that like the number of requests that actually go through from Amsterdam to the underlying web service in San Jose is really small. The vast majority of traffic is satisfied off the cache, which is good, and something that is not going to last really well with the API. Search is the worst thing. It's hard to cache search because we search for different things. And that's also the most expensive thing that we do. It's not Cake's fault that search is expensive, because we're localized into 20, 30 different languages. It's searching all those different translations. It's expensive. Working on ways to fix that at the moment. And have a, usual advice, have a compiler cache, a database cache, all that stuff. At the moment, our database caching is working okay. We're probably going to break it when we upgrade MySQL and then unbreak it again. MySQL, if you start using prepared statements, doesn't cache. Prepared statements don't go to query cache, so you have an issue. We'll go through that when we get to it. The second thing you can do is if you have a control that uses lots of models, if you're in a particular action, you can unbind the things that you're not using, and that's one thing that tends to counteract the 200 queries being a database thing. One thing that I was doing that Nate set me straight about, which is avoiding request action in a loop, because it just seems it's like a function, right? You just call it so you can reuse your code. And he's like, no, are you insane? That's really obvious to the outsider. If anyone's relatively new to it, request action is something that actually goes and runs an action and gives back the data. And the reason that we used this was, here's some code that pulls out sort of one add-on out of the database and generates some XML. Like, okay, so I want to pull 10 add-ons out of the database and generate that XML 10 times over, so I could just like request action with ID and I'll get exactly what I want. It's like 2 lines of code. It's like, no. If you're not familiar, it will go through the entire dispatch cycle. So we did that. I crashed the cluster. Shortly after we had that conversation, so it's really impressive with like the one thing where like I can save code here by writing 2 lines of code instead of like 20 and bring down like 12 web servers. So I mean, that to me that's something that should be in like if there's like a warning, things you should never ever do. Like maybe the section of request action in the manual should be like, just don't ever use this. Anyway. The other thing is if you have stuff that isn't going to fit inside the framework, if you have something like a cron job, just write it. Don't write it in Cake. Okay, because one of my actual complaints about frameworks is that people think that everything is to fit in a framework, even if it's like if it is a quick and dirty 20-line script. If it is a quick and dirty 20-line script, don't write it with Cake. You can still use it with your Cake app. Not everything in the app doesn't have to be pure. I think one of the things is that people who like MVC frameworks tend to be pure thinkers. There's probably a lot of right brain thinking through for like things to be like architecturally nice and pretty to look at, whatever. And so you want everything to fit nicely into your framework. And sometimes some things are ugly and don't. So you just like have to keep them in the room closet and make them small. Don't let that take over. We're just going to be doing a bunch of ongoing performance tweaking. Once we're in the PHP 5 upgrade, that will be easier. The tools are better. Right now, there is no version of APD or Xdebug that works on PHP 4.3.9, which means that we can't do any actual profiling, which is incredibly frustrating. That's something that will be remedied shortly, and we'll probably like look at the results and break into tears. Okay. I've tried to leave some time for questions because I figured people would have a lot. Which always have something to do with last like Firefox long. Any questions? Yeah.
Excuse me if this is off topic, but does Gmail log up Firefox for you as often as it does for me?
I don't know which version of Firefox you use. Firefox and Gmail together are no issue. So one thing to be aware of is, yes, there are a lot of memory leaks in Firefox too. Most of those are not in Firefox 3. They spend a lot of time eliminating memory leaks. One of the problems is that add-ons can have memory leaks. And Firefox does have memory leaks, yes.
Yeah.
It's
not just me, just some other people I work with.
tell them to try the free beta and see if they solve the problem. If they do, they should file that. Or check out something else.
How many downloads do you get every day on AMO? Like add-ons being downloaded and stuff like that. Do you track that somewhere?
I think I know the number for last year, which is really cool. We didn't used to have a metrics department, so now we have a whole bunch of people working on metrics, which is kind of cool. Last year there were 600 million add-ons downloaded. It's really cool. It's a really big number, I know. When we found that number, it was like, look at this chart, it's really awesome. But it's quite neat. We have all these metrics. We have someone who's in charge of metrics. We don't have real job titles, we have silly job titles. The guy who's in charge of metrics' job title is the numerator. Disturbing. There's someone in QA called Human Shield.
That's awesome. What's your title?
We can pretty much settle on evil genius. Went back forth through a bunch of things, but it's disturbing. I still wish we'd get Terry Shade from WordPress, because then he could actually have his job title as PHP terrorist. And I'm just really ashamed. I'm really sad that he got to it first.
I'm just curious how the team works over there. Are you mainly the one doing all the work on AMO, or is it a distributed team?
No, actually not.
Yeah.
The team. So that's actually. Thank you for that opportunity. So we're hiring probably 5 people this year. The team. There's a lot of things we want to do. So I'll talk about team and then I'll remind me to talk about week. The team at the moment, there is web dev manager, there's myself, there's another full-time person, 2 contractors that pretty much work full-time. None none of these people work at addons. Our manager is in Corvallis, Oregon, and one of the other devs is there too. They came out of the OSU, Oregon State University Open Source Lab, as did one of our sysadmins who also works up there, and he's like a half-time sysadmin, half-time web dev. Contractors are in Louisiana and Munich, I think. Also, other people contribute stuff. And actually one of the, and we don't just look after AMO, we look after, there are like 25 websites that includes things like support on Mozilla.org, Mozilla.com, Spread Firefox, Firefox Party, blah, blah, blah. It's a huge long list, which is why PHP 5 migration takes a long time, because there's like 25 different properties. We work on things that aren't sort of publicly visible. BreakPad is a web dev app. BreakPad is the application that gets called every time Firefox crashes. You know the thing that says, do you want to send your crash stuff to Mozilla? It's BreakPad, which is actually Python, not a lot of PHP, a lot of this. There's some Python, a little bit of Perl, just MySQL, and Postgres. I don't think everything with Ruby yet. One of the difficulties having a big company with lots of webby people, and everybody thinks that web dev is easy, is that when they want like a website set up, often they will go and build it themselves. And then when it doesn't work, they'll go, help, support.mozilla.com, which is called Sumo for short. Note that anything .com, that's, we thought it was going to be org, so it's Sumo. Install a wiki product, third-party wiki product, which shall remain completely nameless. Because they have a really nice community and set patches and stuff. They installed it, they came in and said, we installed this wiki software, and it can only do 8 requests per second on the cluster. This doesn't do anything, so all my comments are low code and look out of place. That particular key product on every 8 requests includes 750,000 lines of code. We fixed that, we stripped it down to 75,000, they got this huge speed up in like one day of hack and slash. So yeah, we look after a lot of different projects. Right now, we are trying to hire another PHP person with a new Cake, of course, so please apply. It's a pretty good place to work. People can work. Can I answer your question? Yep.
What other plans do you have for using Cake within Mozilla?
It's interesting. So, just about everything we use uses something different, and that is partly this historical thing of all the different teams building their own stuff and then handing it off to us. At the moment, I don't think it's planned to add it to anything else in particular, although we are looking to rewrite BreakPad. At the moment, BreakPad is written in Python, and it's really, really hard to hire people that know Python and the web dev team. The reason for that is that it was given to us by Google. They wrote it of this, and Google have really good Python. There are good Python people at Mozilla. The build system is written in Python, so anybody that knows Python ends up working on the build team. It's likely it uses pylons, which is an MVC framework for Python. It is likely that we'll rewrite it in PHP, so that might be something where we would use Cake. Particularly now that everybody knows what they're doing with it, it would be stupid if we go do something else. Quite seriously, we support 7 different kinds of forum software. And some of them you've never even heard of, so it's not just like forum and Bug Forum and Ultimate BB and Beagle and Vanilla and it's fun. It's always interesting. It's always different every day, which is good. I was talking about Weave. So the other thing that's coming up is there's this project in Mozilla Labs called Weave, and the Mozilla ID that I was talking about is part of Weave. The idea of Weave is to have a lot more services that integrate between the browser and web services. So there'll be things like, having a roaming profile to use a bit of Windowsism that's actually distributed. So whatever you have in Firefox on your home machine, it syncs with Firefox on your work machine if that's what you want to do. That's the plan. So that requires sort of building some sort of version control system on the web box somewhere that isn't really a version control system. Kind of is, but it doesn't affect any of the ones that we have right now. That's kind of an interesting project. There's lots of good fun stuff